Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Oh, this is going to be good. This is really interesting and very pertinent to the current situation in the world. We need to be very aware of how we get hold of the materials we need to make the products we rely on. We need to do that a little bit more carefully, and that is exactly what we're talking about today. Very specifically, that topic, I think, is a fascinating episode. I think you'll be very interested in it. But before we start that, I do want to talk about our sponsors, simply because it's so important what they're doing, and it's so relevant to Fully Charged, and we have now a long history together, the two organizations. I'm going to be fair to this other company. They've grown a little bit quicker than we have. So we've grown from me on my own in 2012 to getting on for 30 plus people involved in one way or another with Fully Charged Show, and about 20 full-time or close to full-time. So, from my point of view, huge. My Energy, the company that are sponsoring this podcast, have gone from 2 to about 1,000. And they're making loads and loads of stuff. I'm going to list the stuff they make because these are the products they make. So I've raved about this for years. The Zappy charger, that's what I use to charge my cars. And the other day, a perfect example. So a beautiful sunny day in early spring, late winter of the UK. Extraordinary day, really, really cloudless sky. With my new solar installation, we produced 55, count them, kilowatt hours of electricity. And about 45 of that went into a Tesla Model 3. And 45 kilowatt hours just into the car. And that used it perfectly. Everything else in the house was charged or hot or ready to go or warm, cookers, water heating. There's nothing else in our house we don't burn gas anymore. And so everything was fully chocked up. So we put the rest of it in the car. Now that is hundreds of miles of range purely from solar panels. That is remarkable. The thing that also controls how we heat our water, how we heat our central heating, how we heat the cooker, the fridges and everything, that's controlled by the Eddy. And that is a unit that's in a cupboard. I don't even look at it. I don't know what Eddy does. Eddy runs my house. I can't do it. He just overrules me all the time. That is then all communicated by Harvey, who lives in the garage. He's got a lot of green lights. When all his lights are green, the whole place is rocking. And there's been one time where one of the lights was red. Nothing to do with Harvey. It was something lost a connection. I think one of the batteries lost a connection. And that is all controllable and viewable in the My Energy app, which I use all the time. And that tells me where the power is coming from, where it's going to, how much is going there, how much is in the batteries, all those things, and gives you very clear readings. So that's the technology that they're producing now, today, all available now. But I can't talk about it yet because they haven't launched it, but they are producing a lot more really cool stuff in the coming months. And I'm sure we'll be announcing it on here. But it's really worth having a look at My Energy, their website, which is, I'm just going to make sure I've got that right. Well, yeah, it's not that hard to work out, myenergy.com. But I'll spell it for you just so you know, MYENERGI, My Energy. Is the myenergy.com is their page, and that has everything they do on it and their history and what they're up to. And they're founded and British company. They make all their technology in this country, which is truly impressive. We really enjoyed recording this particular podcast. It was great fun. You'll realize why very quickly, because Phil, who I spoke to, Phil Gross, who's from the company we're going to be talking to, is just one of those people that can communicate brilliantly well and is a huge enthusiast for what he's doing and has a long history of understanding of the extraction industry, if you like. So that covers everything from oil and gas to, I don't know what, marble, slate, granite, everything that we extract from the planet. And what we're talking about specifically this time is lithium. So there's often a lot of, I will get criticism on the Twitters and on YouTube comments, what about the battery materials? And I shouldn't do that sort of snidey thing because it's an important topic. Where do the materials of the batteries come from? We need to know. We never questioned where the petrol and diesel came from for decades. many decades, but we need to question that. And now we know where it comes from. We know it's a big problem and it's causing untold, brutal, vicious damage around the world. We know that. We know that. We've got no excuses anymore. We know that when a country is ruled by the income from exporting fossil fuels, that country is corrupt. It's just the way it goes. It's dangerous. It's violent. It's corrupt. And none of that money reaches the average person in that country. It all goes to the rich oligarchs who then spend it on a yacht. How sad is that? So I'm not going to go off on a rant about boring oligarchs and their dull need to have silly cars and yachts. Tragic. This is so much more interesting, so much more exciting. Imagine a mine that uses 98% of the energy that it uses is renewable, and it doesn't use any fossil fuels to extract materials from a mine, from a quarry. Think about that for a moment. That's a big change, and that's what we're talking about today. So I'm not going to waffle on anymore. Let us meet from Snow Lake, which is a Canadian company based in Manitoba. Let us meet Phil Gross, who is just brilliant. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Phil, thank you so much for joining us. This is I am really intrigued by this because there are so many discussions that I get sucked into on comments on YouTube or in Twitter or all those, everything about the materials that make batteries and the impact of extracting them and refining them. You know, so it was an interesting topic 5 years ago. It's become a really hot potato topic now. And I just discovered today that the East African crude oil pipeline, which is being driven through something like 50 villages in East Africa, that's just normal. You know, we're used to that, and it's displacing hundreds of people. You know, in the process of doing it. But that's become normal, whereas extracting lithium at the moment is like the dirtiest thing the human race has ever done. It's worse than everything. You know, I just want some balance, because I think I want to start from the point of view that we accept that extracting fossil fuels and burning them is probably quite bad, even though it's normal and we're used to it.
Yeah. Robert, first of all, let me say it's a huge honor to be with you, not just because I'm a big fan of yours as your role as Crichton, but also because I think what you've been doing, and I've followed and I've listened to quite a bit of it, during your fully charged career, and it's I think you're absolutely on the right track here in terms of your messaging and in terms of your objectives. The point that you make is excellent. You know, I've been in the resource sector my entire career. Right. And there was a real pivot point for me personally when I saw, firsthand what a fossil fuel spill looks like, yes. Literally up close. And, you see that and you see the impact and you see everything and you realize that this is not a sustainable way of going forward. I understand that, society and economy today requires, fossil fuel, and that's the way it's been built, but it doesn't mean that's the way it has to be forever. We can find better ways of doing things. We can, and we're innovative enough to figure out a way to approach this in a reasonable fashion, in a rational fashion, to really look at the balance of evil here and figure out a way to go forward. So I salute you 100% for your messaging here. Absolutely, I'm a huge fan.
Thank you. You're too kind. But I mean, I think the thing that we have to learn as the human race is, we've had a good example. Well, if you would just extract stuff and just burn it, what happens? It's kind of bad. But we should learn from that like there are ways of this is what I think your mission is. But are there ways of extracting materials that we need to make the things we want to live with without doing as much damage as we have in the past. It's always going to have an impact. It's impossible not to, but can we do it in a way that effectively is more sustainable? And that sounds to me like the sort of central core of your project of Snow Lake.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the amazing things about the electric vehicle revolution, if you will, and to us, we see this as the greatest industrial pivot since, the railroad, is that, we as a species, we've come to the realization and the consciousness of our impact on the environment. It's something that's been talked about in the past. It's something that there's a lot of virtue signaling. But today, I think, especially, the younger generation today are far more conscious of this. They're far more aware of it, and they're far more concerned about that impact, which is great. I mean, I think that's one of the the happiest developments, I think, in this generation today. But there's also technologies improved. There's things that we can do about it. There are realistic things. The electric vehicle is really one of them. We can actually just change the way we're doing things, and you don't have to compromise on luxury. You don't have to compromise on economics. As a matter of fact, luxury and economics, they're probably they're almost at the point where they beat the traditional combustion engine. And the fact is, fossil fuel is here with us, and it's a part of our society, and it's not going away tomorrow. But there are things that we can do to improve the future and the planet for ourselves and for our future generations. There's no doubt about it.
Because I mean, currently, so when all the times I will hear from people about lithium in particular, and I should put a little caveat in here that I'm married to an Australian and I'm fascinated by the Australian economy. So I'm very aware that the majority of lithium that we use at the moment comes from Australia, not Chile. But people always know about Chile and lithium and brine pits and the salt flats and, the impact that's having there. And it clearly, I think from what I can gather from the figures I've seen recently, Chile has the largest deposits. Would that be correct in terms of amounts of potential lithium? Is that where the majority is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an important distinction, which, it's an amazing thing because lithium was something I've been, like I said, a resource my entire career. No one ever discussed the word lithium outside the pharmaceutical industry up until about 2 years ago. And now it's become a mainstream topic. It's something that we hear about all the time. It's on all the news. So everybody's very big experts in lithium today. But there's an important distinction that people are not yet cognizant of, and that is that you have lithium brines and you have lithium hard rock. And the ultimately end product is similar, but in terms of extraction, it's a world apart. And this is when you get into the environmental issues, lithium brines is where, that's the questionable grounds where people are pushing back. You have a huge amount of water resources required. So there's diversion from, agriculture communities, from the rancher communities, from the local population communities. And what is the impact of that technology and how that plays out? That's something that the jury is still out on. But in terms of hard rock, we know how that works. I mean, this is something we've been doing for thousands of years. Hard rock mineral extraction is not new technology. What's new is that we can now approach it in ways that hopefully have a much less sinister impact on the environment.
Right, and that's the difference. I didn't understand that until I read some of the information that you've supplied. But so when you're because when I've heard Snow Lake, I imagined that you'd found a lake in Canada that had huge amounts of lithium in it, and you're going to dry it out and drain it and get the whatever. I didn't really have a picture. It's absolutely not that. So you are effectively quarrying rock, or in a similar way that you would extract maybe copper or nickel or whatever. You're taking out large lumps of rock, and from that rock you get some lithium. Is that roughly accurate? That's
roughly it, and it's actually less impactful than other base metals because our rock is fairly inert. It's lithium in a mica. You crush it, you process it, you float it, and then you get out your 6% spodumene. So the process is even less damaging than your average mineral extraction. And on top of that, we also we have access to a fully renewable energy source. So we're able to use a hydro power source, that Manitoba Hydro, because that's the provincial power source. And we're going for a fully electric mining operation. So we'll have no diesel combustion engines on site. Wow. It will just be completely electric. So we're doing everything we can to make ourselves, and I would say we're probably one of the only lithium producer in the world that could say we're fully electric, fully renewable, and we believe that's a critical part of our mission, because if you're going to be in the supply chain of electric vehicles, then your production and philosophy has to be congruent with the end product. You can't be in conflict. Otherwise, you're kind of contradicting what the ultimate aim is.
Yes. And I mean, what is fascinating is that I would think even 10 years ago, the notion of having battery electric, or however you charge it, electric mining machinery was as daft an idea as an electric aircraft, which I'm going to go and see this week. I'm going to go and see one of the first quite large electric aircraft. This is what I always want to kind of communicate to our audiences, is the speed of change. How that is now possible. There is mining. I mean, we're going to go and see some of it later this year, I hope. Some fairly large-scale mining equipment and quarrying equipment that's 100% electric. That is extraordinary. Yeah. So you think that is possible then? By the time you're actually in operation, you'll be able to run the whole thing.
Yeah, we've partnered with a technology group called Megalab. And they actually have a gold mine in operation already in Canada, and I'm happy to take you there whenever you're
I'd love
available.
To go. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And truthfully, it's not just virtue signaling, because the economics of it also are sustaining. Because at the end of the day, when you have underground mining and you have combustion engines, it creates all kinds of air filtration issues. Which have a huge cost attached to them. It creates issues in terms of noise decibel pollution, which is a real problem underground, because that's a very big issue. And we have hydroelectric power, which means we have a relatively competitive power source. So, plugging into the hydro is obviously a lot more a lot more economic than going into some fossil fuel engine. So it's not just the environment, which obviously that's important, but you know what? At the end of the day, it makes sense. Look, and with the airplanes, I'm a huge fan. I know the technology's got to catch up, and we're seeing, battery technology is progressing in sort of like a Moore's law fashion, where it's getting cheaper and better every year. And I'm very excited about that, because the same thing with the airplane. I sit on airplanes all day. Who wants that loud noise and decibel? Imagine if you could fly in an airplane and in silence, you could actually hear the movie. That would be, hugely beneficial. Not all the movies. Some of them I'd rather not hear, but in general.
Yes, that's true. But then, that aspect of what you're doing though is fascinating. That it's and that's going to become I think a more and more common a trail of where materials come from. It's like, how is this dug up first of all? Because I think this is the journey we've all been on since the emergence of electric vehicles. I got an electric car, and my first question was, well, where does the electricity come from? Because at that point in the UK, we were about 40% coal powered. And we're now less than 1%. And that's happened in 12 years. And so I was thinking, but then I never had thought. I'd driven petrol and diesel cars for 40 years, probably 35, 40 years. I'd never thought, where does the petrol or diesel come from? Never occurred to me. And it's only when you think of one bit, it's annoying. I always say it opens a really annoying door, because then you have to think, well, where does that come from? And where does the plastic jug that I buy milk in come from? And where does the plastic wrapping on my carrots come from? It's infuriating, but also important. And I think this is another aspect, is where people say, well, where does the material from your battery come from? And it would be great to say, from a sustainable, renewably powered mine that only uses electric machinery to extract it.
Yeah, and by the way, that's the way of the future. I mean, I speak to the OEMs and I speak to the financial analysts in the sector, and all of them agree that it's a very short period of time till every single electric car will have a number rating attached to it to say, this is the carbon impact of that vehicle. Because today's consumers are much more conscientious. They're concerned about the impact, and they want to know. And there's going to be a number attached to it. We've seen this now in Europe already with like Polestar. They're coming out with the Polestar Zero now. That's, gaining traction. People are looking at that and saying, okay, this is the way of the future. People there's far more responsibility and liability now on the manufacturers to be able to, to answer those questions, those hard questions. Because in the past, you pick up something in the Congo and you drop it off in downtown Detroit or in Coventry. Nobody cared. Nobody asked any questions.
No.
Today's consumers are, they're just not accepting it anymore, and it's great. I think we live in a glorious time when when that is the reality.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the amount that you can produce, because I think that's probably the other thing that makes me anxious, simply because of the sheer staggering tonnage that not just of lithium, but of a lot of materials that Australia exports. Basically, I think the middle of Australia will be an ocean in 100 years' time, because they'll have just dug the whole thing out. Which might be quite nice. You might get a horseshoe-shaped map. But, they are exporting so much, mainly coal, obviously, but also iron ore, lithium, everything. But, the scale of what they're producing is so huge. Is what you're going to be able to do in Manitoba scalable to a sort of an extent where it will have a noticeable impact on manufacturing batteries?
Well, today in North America, it's an amazing thing. North America has 300 million vehicles that, we need to electrify in the next, 10, 15 years. Today, North America lithium production equals a sum total of zero. There is no lithium production.
There's none at all. I didn't know that. Wow.
Nobody really. It's like one of those facts that people are waking up to now, especially with everything that's going on in the world today. And you see the impact of supply chain security.
Yeah.
And North America has nothing. And if you look around at the world, 85% of the lithium in the world today is controlled by China. China has done an incredible job, a 10-year strategy of building out an EV ecosystem, completely, internal. They have 300 EV manufacturers in China. So they're way ahead of the curve on this, and the rest of the world has to catch up. And we're seeing it in Germany. We're seeing it even in the UK. There's been a lot of big moves in that direction. In terms of lithium extraction, in terms of lithium processing and battery. I was discussing this the other day. I think there's a great chance, and I'm quite excited about it, that the UK, comes back as an automotive industry once again, and in all its glory. And this is the second life of the UK automobile industry. I think it would be amazing if we could bring that back again on a sustainable level.
Yes,
that would be one of the great developments of my lifetime.
Yeah, no, it's a huge opportunity that I've ranted about on many occasions, particularly to the manufacturers. Again, this is it, mate. Don't stop making your diesel engines now. Don't muck about.
Right. And everybody's been waiting around to see what happens. And that's really what I think, everyone is kind of waiting around to see what happens, because they've watched the Chinese over the past 10 years, on the sidelines. And the Chinese have really moved the goalpost tremendously.
Absolutely.
And now the rest of the world is playing catch up to that. And they really have to, move on that fast. And what's happening, like here in the United States, Ford they made their biggest infrastructure investment in their history by electrifying the F-150, $7 billion. And they sold out like in 20 minutes. They were sold out. And their wait list is closed. The wait list on the Cybertruck is closed. So you can't even, as a consumer, you can't even get your hands on an electric vehicle in many of the lines. So I think they're waking up to the fact now that, hey, this has to happen, and the raw materials don't exist, and where they do exist, they're well outside our reach. And we're seeing this across the planet today. I mean, certainly in Europe and North America are now playing catch up to that. So it's an exciting time, that's for certain.
And I mean, so you feel confident that you can supply a sizable chunk of the lithium required to build all those vehicles from your project there in Manitoba?
Our project currently stands at about 11.1 million tons, which would give us like 160,000 tons per year of a 6% spodumene. That would make an impact. But what we're really hoping for is we're gonna multiply our resource over the next 6 to 12 months. To get us to, something more in the range of, 30 to 40 million tons would be our goal. We are not going to be the absolute solution to the problem. We just, but we are part of the solution. A lot of things need to come together in terms of the raw materials. And I think that's the number one thing, is the lithium. And then, the processing capacity needs to be built, because it doesn't exist. And then we got to, and we're already seeing the battery manufacturers coming to North America to start, and the UK as well. We're seeing them come to their shores to start building battery plants, but they're going to need the raw materials, which is a convenient fact that is being slightly ignored at the moment, because there is no real answer to it, because it doesn't exist. That's the amazing thing about this particular commodity, is we're not dealing with copper and cobalt or nickel, where it exists, but maybe not in the volumes that we need, and there's a disruption. Here, we're talking about a resource that currently, in its current state, does not exist outside the fact that it's in the Earth's crust somewhere. But in terms of being delivered to a battery manufacturer, it's just not there. So we need to ramp up quickly. Yeah, we got to make this happen.
because that's, I mean, it's a question I think I've asked before, but I know you'll be more familiar with it. But which is, I get asked sometimes, like, is there enough lithium? And there was a wonderful engineering professor I once did a panel with at a public event. And he said, honestly, don't worry about the lithium. You know, if the whole world becomes middle class, there's not enough steel, rubber, copper, nickel. He then did the list of materials. We can't all have cars. It's just not going to work. You know, it doesn't matter. And if we did all have cars, there's nowhere to drive them because it would just be the whole world would be a solid traffic jam. So that's the whole world would just be
be one big M25.
But I mean, I feel there is enough lithium to make the batteries that we need. I mean,
the lithium is definitely prolific in the Earth's crust. There's no question about it. But nobody's looked for it because nobody cares. But our resource is fascinating. Our resource was discovered in the 1930s. We're in the middle of an area that's been a gold mining camp for over 100 years. And they kept drilling it and coming up with lithium. And it was like a huge disappointment. Like, what are we going to do with all this lithium? And it's only, literally. And only 2 years ago when people said, hey, lithium. Yeah. Oh, right. Remember that lithium that we found. So that's what's happening in the world. So they'll find lithium. I have no question about that. Over the next 10, 15, 20 years, they just found lithium on Mount Everest. I don't know if you saw that story. But
yes,
like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, they found lithium on Mount Everest. I don't think you have to go to Mount Everest. I think it'll be a lot easier than climbing Everest to find lithium. But the fact is, lithium is prolific, and the challenge is not finding it. The challenge is going to be, first of all, finding it in the right places, economic, infrastructure, and being able to deliver it to market. And that's what's going to take time. But to your earlier point, by the way, I do think that the next revolution, if you will, is going to be the grid, but we're still struggling with trying to, but I think let's take it one thing at a time because the grid is a much bigger challenge right now than finding the electric vehicles.
Yes, I know. When you say the grid, are you talking about like large scale grid level storage of electricity? Is that, as in batteries having that role?
Yeah, but also the fact that, like you say, if you're plugging in your electric car, where's that power coming from?
Yes, yes.
I see. That's the next question. That's the next question that's going to be, it's being asked, but that's really the next question. And we have to get to a point where we can deal with that as well. But like I said, the human race is an incredibly innovative species. I don't, people worry all the time. I believe, I have a huge amount of confidence because I just see what, things that have developed in the past 30, 40, 50 years. We're capable of amazing things. So I think that, we shouldn't be panicking. We should just be putting our heads to it and figuring it out. And that's what's happening now in the battery industry now. It's taken 50 years to get from the invention of the lithium battery to where we are today, where you're going to look at, airplanes. But now we're on a roll. Now we're accelerating that development. And that's, I think it's a glorious time to be in, following and a spectator of this industry.
Yeah. And in terms of cost, I mean, I'm just trying to work out, like, if the Panasonic Tesla gigafactory in Nevada where gets a truckload of lithium from you, is that going to be competitively priced with, say, a truckload of lithium from Chile or Australia? I don't know if it gets delivered in trucks.
No. You raise an excellent point. We have an incredible advantage in that regard as well. We are literally about 40 kilometers from a rail line, and that rail line connects straight into the whole USA network. So it means, we say it in jest, but in theory, we could be from Snow Lake to downtown Detroit in a day and a half. And you're talking about a seamless, logistics solution, but you're also talking about, I don't think there's a way to have a smaller carbon footprint than going across the rail on the network. Because most things, like today, you talk about Chile or Australia, it's shipping tens of thousands of miles into China. It's coming out of China, then shipping, thousands of miles inland. So you're talking about a whole supply chain that takes 9-10 months plus, the carbon footprint. Yeah. So, and again, you got to balance out your carbon footprint and your economics. And I think we're winning on both fronts. Like I said, we could be anywhere in the United States quickly, efficiently, economically, and with a minimal footprint.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also, I know it's not the case now, but it's one of the easier transitions is to run trains on electricity. It's, We've been doing that for well over 100 years. It's very doable. I mean, I would admit that in more remote areas, it's more of a challenge, but it's still, I think the point is it can be done. That's always been my argument with an internal combustion engine has to burn fossil fuels or maybe biofuel, but that's been proven to be a rather ridiculous solution. Yeah. Whereas an electric car, you can charge it off the dirtiest electricity we've ever made on the planet, or solar, or wind. It doesn't care where the electricity is the same, still works. And that, in a sense, is the advantage you have, is that you don't have any oceans between where you extract and refine the material and where it gets used. I mean, that is, I think, a huge, and in a sense, that's what we need all around the world. We need that advantage. I mean,
well, they're looking at electrifying the shipping industry as well. That's that's on the drawing table. I think a lot of this comes down to the technology, and for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, the amount of capital, the amount of brains that are being deployed towards battery technology is unprecedented. So I'm very confident that we'll just keep moving this moving this up the hill, and we will get to that point where all these things are going to be easily achievable in a short period of time. And again, it's going to be economics and green are going to there's going to be a confluence. The interests will meet, and that will make it happen. And there's no question. And look, and we're just seeing now, like one of the big sectors that is getting electrified is the pleasure boats. I just saw it. I was just looking at a company the other day. But you think about it, when you're going out on a quiet lake to go fishing, do you really want all the noise of that boat, that comes with it? Imagine you could do that in a completely silent fashion. We're taking the world back, 100, 150 years to the point when it probably was a bit of a quieter world with, traffic making less noise, airplanes less noise, boats less noise, everything. Imagine the quality of life that will provide us with.
Yeah, no, I have the privilege of having travelled along Amsterdam canals in a beautiful, it was originally an Italian speedboat that we did an episode about it. It's been converted to electric. It has a Tesla ludicrous drive motor and batteries in it, so it can go very far. It's built to pull water skiers, so it has that kind of power. But we were just pottering along on a canal, and there were little ducks and baby ducks swimming right next to us. They weren't the slightest bit alarmed because there was no noise. It was just lapping water as it went along. And when he made it go faster in deeper water, it did make some noise then, and it was very impressive. But even then, it wasn't noisy. It just made more noise. But it's the most beautiful experience going in. All the boats in Amsterdam now are electrically powered. That's been the case for a while. So it's
there was. I don't know if I should promote other publications, but there was an article at the FT this weekend where I can't remember which company it was, but they're working with these music composers now to develop the noise that should come with an electric vehicle.
Oh, yes. A lot of talk about
that. So people are concerned about the lack of noise. I'm looking forward to the silence.
So because it was also the thing I think I worked out quite early on when I was driving electric cars, is that, I was just imagining, imagine if you live near a big freeway or a big motorway now, and that noise of that traffic. But actually, it's not going to make much difference because the most of the noise from an electric vehicle is from the tires and the wind over the, it isn't actually the end. It's not, in a big truck, it might be the engine, but in a car, modern petrol engines is very quiet, really. I mean, the crazy thing is we've spent 50 years doing everything we can to make petrol engines quieter.
Yeah.
And then we make vehicles that are much quieter. Everybody goes, oh no, they're quiet. They'll run me over.
But imagine the people living in the flight path of Heathrow. I mean, that could be a game changer. Yeah. But the actual way that you extract it, then, because from what I could gather from your brilliant slide deck, because there's one area that will be what I would call a quarry, so like a hole in the ground that you can see from the side. But there is some where you'll be doing what I would call mining, i.e., it's a hole under the ground. You can't see it from the surface, and there'll be an entrance. Is that accurate? Is there two distinct areas that you're working on? Yeah. So what we're looking to do is to do an open pit as a starter pit.
Right.
So the first year or two, you get into what starter pit was it called, where the economics an open pit is a lot easier to mine and a lot more economic. And then eventually you do go underground because some of our resource goes down, half a kilometer beneath the surface and even deeper. So at that point we would be looking at going underground.
Yeah, but initially it's like, I don't know whether you call it open cast or a quarry. I'd call it. I don't know.
A quarry, open pit.
But,
very straightforward. Most of the refuse rock after we extract the lithium, most of the rock can probably just go right back into the ground as well.
Right.
So the impact would be minimal.
Fairly minimal, right?
Yeah,
because that's another thing. I mean, I've had this bizarre experience of quarrying and digging. So because of the weird TV shows I made, but I did operate the biggest hydraulic digger in the UK in a granite mine. So that they blast that, and then this digger comes in and digs it, and it's huge. It's absolutely monstrous. I mean, it gets delivered in parts to the quarry. It's too big to carry on. It's really genuinely enormous, which is, I'm guessing, but that was diesel. So I'm really intrigued about the diggers. But the other experience I've had, which is much nearer where I live, is basically limestone quarrying, whether you can tell the stone is much softer. I will get to the point there, but that has a machine that goes ding 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 and just rips rock out like that. They don't blow it up with explosives here. They can dig it out like that. I don't know what is the kind of rock that lithium is in, or that you'll be dealing with. Do you need to blow it up basically?
There's a lot of going. It's a granite mostly, so it's a pretty hard rock. Yeah, it's a pretty hard rock. It's actually very pretty. I don't have a piece of it. I have it on my desk. It's a very pretty rock, but it's a granite, so it's a pretty hard rock. You do blow it, and then you just you gather it and you scoop it up. Yeah, it's interesting about those big trucks that you talk about. I've seen them the biggest pit in the world is in Kalgoorlie, Australia, which you should go see sometime. It's an amazing sight to see. But they have these like 10-story high trucks. Yeah. And they're incredible beasts. But what they found a few years ago is that every time you change the tire, it's like, I don't know, like $15,000 a tire. So what they did is they swapped out all the drivers, and they made all female drivers, because they are easier on the brakes and on the tires, and it was a huge cost savings. Yeah.
Wow, and the tires last longer. I did not know. That is fascinating. Yeah, wow, isn't that interesting?
So it turns out that lady drivers are better drivers than we are. Of course. And I've always said that. Right. I always insist that my wife drive wherever we go for that reason.
Right.
She's easier on the tires.
I think, though, I have a peculiar Australia. I don't think my wife would get a job there, because she's got quite a heavy right foot, and she's Australian, but she wears out tires quicker than me. But she's the exception that proves the rule, I'm sure. But isn't that amazing that it's actually worth them going to the trouble of doing that, because it actually makes that kind of economic difference.
Huge difference. Apparently the men are more aggressive on the brakes and on the tires.
Right.
It was an economic decision. Yeah.
Wow. But they are. I've never driven one of them. I've had a ride in one, and it took me 10 minutes to get in the cab. You have to climb up ladders. It goes on and on.
Yeah, I've done huge things. Yeah, it's amazing, amazing things.
So will you be using equipment of that scale then, when you're in full production?
I think it would not be that. That's much more of like like super pit size. Right. So we're looking at smaller scoops, a couple tons maybe, but nothing. I don't think anything of that big. But if we are, I'm saying it right now, you are invited to come out there, and you will actually, we'll let you drive as well. That would be get behind the wheel.
Right, because I'm a dab hand in a digger. I've had a lot of experience with diggers. So I mean, that was the peculiar thing. The actually hands-on experience of this huge digger. I mean, it was unimaginably big. Is exactly the same as the mini digger I'd used in my garden, which is tiny. Right? But the actual movement with your hands controlling it is identical. Obviously, it kind of makes sense. But the only time you sort of thought, oh, this is different, is when I'd lift the rock up and scoop it up and turn and then drop it. And when he dropped it, they dropped in slow motion. Well, that's because each lump of rock was like 42 tons, and it just went, it fell down. That was different to the gravel at the front of my house.
Well, we should go one time. You and I. Have you ever been to Diggerland in Kent?
I have been to Diggerland. Yes.
Oh, all right. I was going to invite you to come. We can go out there and have some good times. Digging up in Diggerland. I think it's one of the greatest theme parks in the world, because just because of that reason, you get that opportunity.
Yeah. to have a bit of a dig.
Yeah.
But then that is an intriguing thing. So I'm just thinking so there are quarries near where I live where they are actually digging up stone for building. So it's for roads, it's for hardcore for roads, and it's for building walls with its, all that stuff. Whereas what you're doing is you're digging up lots of rock, you're taking it to a facility, smashing it up, taking out the lithium, but then there's presumably huge amounts of rock left around which you don't need. You're not going to use it for something else. So is that what you eventually will put back in the hole? Right.
Yeah, you use that as backfill eventually. Also, there are local industries that need it for road paving, and things like that. So we're looking at those options as well. At the end of the day, there's a sacrifice to be made for living in the 21st century, but at the same time, we have the ability, and we can still, we can make this work in a way that that actually has a responsible element to it. So, every possibility that could be pursued in this regard, that's what we're trying to achieve.
That's what we're trying to do. And I
think we all have to. I think we have, that's
we have to.
Job today.
Yeah. But from what I can gather, though, the local area, so the inhabitants of the local area where you're working are quite used to extraction, mining and all that stuff. So I'm presuming you're not kind of knocking down a small town in order to be able to have the quarry. I'm hoping.
No, absolutely not. Where we are, it's really the history is fascinating. In Manitoba, especially where we are, we're about 8 hours north of Winnipeg, which is the capital of the province. Right. And in Manitoba, there's over 100 years of mining legacy, and they're very proud of it for good reason. And this is something that they understand, and this is something that sustains the economy of the North. It's a huge factor up there. There's quite a few mines operating, and have been, like I said, for a century. Yeah. So there's a huge amount of support, and it's a lot of it is and we've had the support from the provincial government, from the municipal government, from the local communities. Right. I meet with the premier, and I meet with the mayor of Snow Lake. So everybody's very into this, because at the end of the day, being a part of the supply chain for the EV industry, it's first of all, it's economically beneficial for the next generation. But also, again, there's that awareness. People, if you're going to be in mining, let's be in mining for the right reason. Let's be making an impact. Let's be doing something right. The idea that, let's everything, we can't sacrifice all elements of mining. We can't sacrifice, everything in the world today in one fell swoop. But what we can do is we could do it better, and we could do it more responsibly, and we can make a difference. And I think that's, the province of Manitoba is very much behind that. We've seen a huge push, and the federal government as well. They see the opportunity now where they're the next door neighbor to the United States. There's going to be a huge move to get these electric vehicles on the road, and they could play a critical role in this in a responsible fashion. So it really is a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. And it's also, I think I don't want to dwell on it, but I think it's worth remembering that not a million miles away is some of the most impactful resource extraction we've ever had on the planet, as in the tar sands. Canadian tar sands is like not a good advert for the fossil fuel industry. It doesn't matter how you try and spin it. That is leaving a fairly long-term legacy for future generations to deal with what's going on there. And I don't think they're bothering to think, let's use renewable electricity to operate our extraction and refining systems.
Yeah, I don't think we're getting away from fossil fuel anytime soon.
No,
I think it's slightly delusional to when you hear people say, "Look, we have a huge global economy today."
Yeah,
it's basically supported and powered by fossil fuel. And I wish that wasn't. I had this idea when I was in uni I wanted to do like a paper where if everyone got together and said, okay, you got 20 years to outlaw fossil fuel, but every country agrees and signs to it, and we'll put $1 trillion. In those days, $1 trillion was a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
It shows you how old I am. But you put $1 trillion to it, get the best minds in the world in Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, Stanford, and let's figure out a plan, because we can. Let's be honest. Yeah. Today we're still at a point where we got to stick a hole in the ground and bring up fossilized dinosaurs to I feel like we've probably come to the point where we can figure out a way around that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we're not there yet, and everybody wants to talk about being green, but nobody wants to give up their iPhone. So we kind of have to figure out a way to deal with that. And I think we are. I think, look, the first step is electric vehicles. There's no doubt about it. And that is going to make a huge impact ultimately. People are arguing it's not it's not going to solve everything. Yeah, of course it's not going to solve everything. No. But it's a part of the solution.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it's important. I always want to harp on about, commercial vehicles, fleet vehicles. I mean, I think that we're going to see that transition happen, if anything, faster. I mean, there's numerous good examples in the UK where big distribution companies are, they've gone from one experimental electric vehicle where they're going, well, we're going to try it. And, so maybe 5 years ago, doing deliveries of that. Now they've got 4,000 electric vehicles that they have charging at their main depot, which is we've got loads of solar panels and its vehicle to grid systems being installed. They've gone from like, oh, we'll try one to right. That's what we're going to do because they've worked out it's cheaper. Same reason that your mining equipment, it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, but there's also more to it than that. It's low hanging fruit for them. So for that, all these corporations, right? They've all committed to scope 3 or whatever the case may be, to carbon neutrality. And this is the lowest hanging fruit. You get your logistics, you get your supply chain into electric. That's the easiest thing. You're not impacting your productivity. No. You're just making a change, which might actually, like you say, be more economic as well, ultimately. Yeah. That's why all these guys like Amazon are, backing Rivian and UPS. They're all getting into the game because for them, lowest hanging fruit. Let's get. By the way, it's the same thing with the governments. The governments are pushing, the population to go into electric vehicles because of their COP26 requirements and commitments. So it's the lowest hanging fruit. Get the population to electric vehicles, and you reduce a significant percentage of your emissions. Everything else is going to affect GDP. If you go to industry and say, guys, you need to clean up your act. Well, that's not very politically friendly. You get into a little bit of trouble on that. So first, electric vehicles is the good first step. That's politics. I'm proud to be living at a time when, people are taking this seriously. It's not, this is not just talking the talk anymore. People are actually walking the walk. And I think that it's great. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think for us, I'm sure you're the same, but, who've been aware of the potential for this for the last, 10, 12 years, I was very, cautious and a little bit cynical early on because I went, the theory is brilliant. Well, I'm driving a Nissan Leaf that if I can get 80 miles range out of it, I've done really well. And if it's wet and cold, it's more like 65, And so that's what you're facing. And then that was in like 2010, 2011. And then you go, hang on a minute. Now I'm driving an electric car that in the cold and the wet and the rain with hills can do 280 miles without a second thought, and probably in the summer closer to 300. And I don't even think about that. It's become normal so quickly that I don't think, have I got enough to get down to London? Yeah, I can get to London and back and go somewhere else. It's not, you don't even have So that change has happened in that short time. And I now understand, the other one we all thought, which I think is relevant to you, which is what Jeremy Clarkson said on Top Gear in 2008. These are all well and good, these fancy electric cars, but you'll throw the battery away after 3 years. And that became fact in this country. That became the standard response. Well, I love an electric car, but I've got to throw the battery away after 3 years. Well, you can if you're an absolute idiot, but it will last. Yeah. It'll last 12 to 15 years, 500,000 miles. Because that's the other thing I think we've seen the changes. We didn't know 12 years ago, did we? I didn't know how long a lithium-ion battery would last in a car. It could be 2 weeks. I don't know. No.
Well, there's amazing technology now on the horizon, and actually a lot of it's in practice already in China. Because they're hitting the first generation of batteries already because they're 10 years into this. There's amazing technology on rejuvenation or on redeployment towards other purposes, or just what they call urban mining, where you can actually just reclaim the elements from it and reuse them in other capacity. So there's amazing technology. But to your point, one of the most incredible marketing feats of the electric vehicle, and I don't think anyone actually executed this strategy, but it's the fact, is that 5 years ago, if you were driving an electric vehicle, because of the fact that you only got 80 miles, and because of the fact that in the rain, and it was really a virtue signal. You were just virtue signaling because you suffered. I mean, it was not easy. The first pioneers.
Well, there was nowhere to charge them either. There was you couldn't recharge them if you were away from home.
Infrastructure wasn't there. It was all there. But today, they've somehow managed to, detach the electric vehicle from the virtue signal.
Yes,
and
just a car.
No longer, right, and now just a car. And you don't have to eat granola anymore just because you drive an electric vehicle. You could now actually some of my best friends who drive Teslas are climate change deniers. It's no longer. The case is now that it actually is a luxury item. And there's a huge amount of consumer desire to be in an electric vehicle for all the reasons that that we've stated. And I do believe we're getting to the point. I can't imagine it's going to take much. Another 5 years, 7 years. We'll be at the 1,000-mile point on the electric vehicle. I think that's absolutely certain.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes have got a car. We went to see it. That is 1,000 kilometers, so sort of 600-700 miles. And that's and what's great. It's not just a bigger and bigger battery. It is the technology that it's the air. It's very, very slippery through the air. It's as light as they can make it. The tires are narrow and hard. It's all those clever. And the software obviously is vitally important. I think you're right, and it is also that's partly a public education thing. Is you probably realistically don't need 1,000 miles range in your car. You could probably make do with 200. 200 is nice. Once you go over 200,
especially as they roll out the infrastructure for the deployment of so you can charge up wherever you are. So it'll make a huge difference to the range anxiety, as they call it. But on that point, it's one of the most amazing things to me, anyway, is that Ford went with the F-150 as their big infrastructure move. Your F-150 drivers are generally people who suffer from range issues because they're more suburban, and yet the take up was monster, and that caused right. Stellantis came out with the Ram. And GMC come out with the Silverado, so they're all moving to that. And there's a huge amount of competition now in this space because everyone's recognizing that this is what consumers want. So we're now it's become an open playing field, and the legacy manufacturers are now realizing that this is what their customers are demanding, and they're now going to have to compete with Rivian and Tesla and Lucid and Ford and Jet. You're all going to have to compete for this playing field, and this is the reality. That's how it's playing out at the current moment.
Yeah, and I mean, do you see that? I'm just wondering what the plan is, or your future plan is, as to when you'll be producing materials. Then, I mean, I do, because that's one thing we haven't covered, is because you're not there yet. There's not a hole in the ground yet.
Well, there's small holes.
Lots of drills.
We're drilling. We have 3 drills at the moment. But the plan is that we're going to get to the point, hopefully, where we're doing the environmental permitting now, or the studies for that. So we hope at the end of next year to be at the position where we're going to be permitting and getting the capital to build out the mine in 2024. So if we could build it out, commission it, and get it into production during 2024 and 2025 be in production. That's where we see the event horizon for the demand kicking in. Today everybody's talking about it, but like in the United States of America last year, I think they sold a total of about 500,000 electric vehicles, which is not a lot when you consider the size of the fleet. It's a drop in the ocean. But that's growing 60% year on year. It's actually growing as fast as they can get off the production lines. Every consumer today who's going out to buy a new car is at least 50%, going to choose an electric. That's where the mind frame is today. Very often they come up and they say, okay, I can't get it because the waiting list or whatever the circumstances are. But everybody wants to be in an electric car, so it's going to happen as fast as they can get it off the assembly line.
And then, so it's not, but it's also presumably not just a hole in the ground and a connection to a rail network. Will you have a processing plant there? Is that where that will be, or will that be in another location? So
at the site, you get it out of the ground, you crush it, you separate it, you try it, but you basically through flotation, you get it to a 6%. 6% is your first stage. It's what we call, a concentrated spodumene. The problem today is that in North America, not only is there no lithium, but there's no lithium processing. So the ability to get it to the next stage, which is your hydroxide, which is a raw material for a battery component. So there is nowhere today in North America to be able to process that.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing because there's some discussions. If you want the technology today, you have to go to China because they're the only ones who are actually really doing full scale conversion of that size. So our plan is we've identified a site in southern Manitoba, same power source, same rail access, and we're going to build out a hydroxide plant there. And there's a lot of support from the government, from the communities to make this happen, because this will hopefully bring in, we're going to build out an ecosystem that will hopefully bring in, either a battery manufacturer or an OEM, because we're going to joint venture this. That's the idea. We want to joint venture it with an end user. So our plan is what we call rock to road. We really want a seamless integration of the supply chain. And I think that's one of the most important lessons we've seen in the past few weeks, especially. You need to secure your supply chain, and it needs to be integrated from beginning to end, that you don't suffer these issues, geopolitics or just supply chain disruptions.
Yeah, because I mean, it is quite intriguing just from the point, historically, from the point of view of the computer industry, if nothing else. For the last at least 25, 30 years, the computer industry in America has been manufactured. Well, because they kind of all manufacture them in China, but they developed and they did manufacture them in the United States. Tens of millions of computers and phones and things which had batteries. And so you would have thought there may have been a sort of, even if it was quite small, quite modest, lithium plants that could produce the materials that would then go into a battery in a laptop or a phone. But clearly that was never the case. It's extraordinary.
All imported, for the most part imported. They're starting to build the battery plants now. There's been big moves on that front. We've seen these announcements, but they're really not dealing with the big elephant in the room, which is, okay, it's great to build the battery plants. Where's the lithium going to come from? I remember, like I said, China's ambition is they're going to dominate the global automobile industry. They got 10 years experience. They got 10 years of R&D. They have the raw materials. They have the entire, holistic system in place. And we see this in the UK this year. I think there's at least 2 Chinese manufactured cars, EVs, that are coming to the UK.
And they're popular and they're really well made. That's the thing.
They're really well made because they have 10 years of experience, right? So they've tried and failed a bunch of designs. They're now at the point where it's a good product. And, my favorite is, you always get the people say, but the consumer will never buy a Chinese car. And I'm probably older than you, Robert, but I remember.
I don't think so.
I remember when everyone in the United States of America was saying, I will never buy a Japanese car. I will. And then 6 months later, everyone had a Datsun or a Toyota or, because you know what? It was cheaper, it was better. It was
really well made. Yeah. No, that was exactly the same. That when I was a kid, a Japanese car was a joke, and it was then followed by a South Korean car. Well, I'm not going to buy one of them; they'll be rubbish.
Yeah.
Really? They've done rather well. Hyundai and Kia, quite popular brands. Yeah.
Right. It took them a half an hour of proving that their product was not as good, if not better, economic. Yeah. It was better, and here we go. Now everybody's driving them. So the Chinese cars, and when you talk about last year, 6 million electric vehicles were sold globally. 6 million.
Right.
Only 500,000 were in North America.
Yeah.
3 million were Chinese manufactured cars. Yeah. Companies that 99% of the population have never heard of. But these are the companies that have the know-how, that have the technology, that have the raw materials. So we really need to work hard to get into
catch
this,
up.
We have to. We don't have a choice. There's an existential threat to our industry, and we really, I take this quite seriously. I think globalized economy is great, but there's a glorious history and a glorious, a proud history of manufacturing automobiles, and I don't think we're prepared to sacrifice that yet.
No. And I mean, just one last thing I'd love to ask you, because it's not directly related to what you're doing there, but I don't know the geology of the North American continent, but is there nickel, copper, cobalt? I don't think there is cobalt, is there? But, are there other materials there that could be resourced within that landmass, or are they really not in that area at all?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is what NIMBYism. And I think that's the biggest challenge to all mining opportunities. The reason why Australia, that you mentioned earlier, is so successful is because Australia is basically a hugely empty continent.
Yeah, there's no one there to be NIMBY about it.
Right. So there was there was a point when Australia considered iron ore a strategic mineral and was illegal to export. Until one day, I forget the name of the gentleman. I think it was Reinhardt, but he was flying in his plane and he had to make an emergency landing, and he landed somewhere in the middle of the outback. And he looked around and said, "Wow, it's just iron ore. The whole country is actually made out of iron ore." So that I think that's why the advantage there. What we found in North America is dense populations. There's huge pushback. A lot of the projects, even on lithium, I'm seeing it. These new mines that want to come into operation where they have a resource, they're finding themselves now where they are being challenged by local communities, even Nevada, which is a fairly they're fairly proficient in the mining sector. They're pushing back against mining in Nevada now. There's a huge amount of that, and like I said, in 2020, 2022, people are no longer that comfortable with it. But when you go out to other places in Canada, where this is their culture, this is the legacy, this is what they've been doing for 100 years, and it's a fairly empty country. There's a stronger appetite, and there's a better comprehension, because you say the word mining to people, and it sort of invokes all kinds of images. Whereas in places where they actually have experience and they've seen it and they know how to deal with it, there's a much more comfortable understanding.
Yeah, no, I mean that is the reason I really wanted to talk to you guys, because of that acknowledgement. It's hard not to get the feeling that there's some resource extraction in Australia that's not done with the greatest forethought of environmental care. Let's just get the iron ore out there and sell it to China as fast as we can. Forget the rest. Oh, your boat's just gone through the Great Barrier Reef. Well, sod it. That's fine. Don't worry about it. There is an element of that.
I hope that's not true.
Well, there have been incidences where huge lumps of coral reefs have just been smashed by huge ships. But anyway, let's hope that that gets better. But I think it's really important that even before you start, the whole project is, how do we do this with the least impact? How do we leave the least mark on the face of the planet, from doing what we need to do, which is, I think, a really, I think that's got to be the next step for the human race, is how do we live within our resource limits? Is there really, because then, this is the other thing that I think is a critical difference. It's really hard to recycle a litre of diesel. I haven't come across that yet. Whereas, and then people say, well, it's very expensive and difficult to recycle things like lithium or cobalt, but you can do it. You literally can't do it with a fossil fuel you burn, but you can do it. And that technology is going to, I think, expand, become cheaper because of economies of scale. And, there was a guy I talked to a few years ago about materials extraction, and he was Australian. The quote that I really loved was, "In about 50 years, we've got to stop digging it up." So his whole idea was, we've got to get those resources now. We need them, but then we've got to use them again and again. We can't carry on.
Urban mining. It's a great terminology.
Urban mining is great. I love that. Yeah. There's actually been an announcement. There's been an announcement today by the Royal Mint in the UK that they are now urban mining discarded domestic electronics for gold. There's very small amounts of gold used in
I've seen that already for over 20 years, that today's computers have less precious metals than they did 20, 30 years ago. But I saw that about 20, 30 years ago. They were doing that on a big scale, for all the PGMs, and they were everything. But also, just coming back to the point, the recycling industry on batteries is making huge progress. There's amazing things going on in it. I've seen it, up close in China. But one of the reasons why China pushed this EV strategy over 10 years ago was not just to, for an economics and to dominate, but as their emerging middle class was becoming more, aware, there was a huge pushback about the pollution in the cities.
Yes.
The government said, how can we deal with this? What's the solution to this problem? Because it was becoming unbearable and people weren't going to stand for it anymore. And that's, the last thing you want is an upset, unsettled population. Yeah. And that was a big part of their motivation. So I think, we're seeing this everywhere today. That's just the symptom of, of a global phenomenon where people aren't going to accept it anymore. You live in a city Why do you have to suffer from from the pollution and from these issues? There are ways that we can work around this and solve this problem.
No, that's fantastic, Phil. Thank you so much. I mean, that's really fascinating talking to you. And also, I'm just hoping that I can somehow work out how to wangle a visit to the. I'd love to go to. So I've been to Vancouver and I've been to Montreal in my life. So as always, either side. I've never been in the middle.
It's a little different than Snow Lake. I'll give you that. But I was there a couple of weeks ago. It was minus 42 Celsius there, so it was a little nippy. I
might come in the summer.
Yes, but I officially and formally extend to you an invitation. I will take you up there. We'll spend the day. I think you would be amazed.
I'd love to come.
It's God's country. It's absolutely stunning out there, and the people are fantastic. So whenever you want, you're my guest.
That's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. Let's hope we can work that out one day. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, Phil.
No, thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's all we've got time for. Just want to say another big thank you to My Energy. What they're doing is brilliant. We love it. And we can't wait to announce what they're doing next. Really exciting. I'd like to thank Phil. What a dude. I'm going to try and get him to come to some of our live shows because he's just brilliant. I want him on the podcast again. So many more questions I wanted to ask, but we had to wind it up then. But that's it. Please do subscribe to this podcast because we do get, as you can see, I don't have to boast about it. It's just a fact. We get some brilliantly interesting people on it. Subscribe. Tell your mates. That's a way I've found a lot of podcasts when people have told me about it. Have you heard the? Oh yeah, okay, I'll have a go at that. So tell them. Have you heard the Funny Time podcast? You might get some more people listening, but a lot of people already do. I'm impressed how many people listen to this with me waffling away. That's all. I don't want to say anything else. I will mention Patreon in passing, but that's entirely up to you. And it's wonderful that the people who support us on there, we're hugely grateful to them. But that's all we have until next time. If you have been, thank you for listening.